How can one public humiliation at a company dinner tear a marriage apart in front of everyone who matters? What happens when a wife, chasing status and excitement, moves her own husband to the kid's side for a coworker, only to watch him stand, photograph the proof, and walk out, recording her stunned face forever? Can a woman who's convinced herself she's owed more survive the moment her secrets become evidence, and her family watches her world collapse? The chandeliers at Romano's cast a warm glow over our company's annual dinner, and I felt absolutely radiant. My burgundy dress hugged my curves perfectly, and I'd spent 2 hours getting my hair just right. This was my moment, my chance to cement my position as the rising star of Morrison Associates' marketing department. "Myra, you look stunning tonight," Daniel Luring whispered as he approached our table. My heart skipped a beat. Dan was everything Evan wasn't: confident, powerful, successful. As head of procurement, he controlled millions in vendor contracts, and his attention had been instrumental in my 3 promotions over the past 18 months. "Thank you, Dan. You clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, letting my fingers brush his arm as I adjusted his tie. The electricity between us was undeniable, and I could feel several colleagues watching our interaction with interest. Evan sat beside me, looking uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. My husband was a decent wedding photographer, but he had no understanding of corporate dynamics or the delicate art of networking. He was holding me back, and tonight was proof of it. "The seating arrangement seems a bit cramped over here," I announced to the table, my voice carrying just the right amount of authority. "Evan, honey, why don't you move over to that table with the other spouses and kids? You'll be more comfortable there, and it'll give Dan room to sit with the marketing team." The silence that followed was deafening. Evan's face went pale, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. But this was business, and he needed to understand that my career came first. "Myra, I think I'm fine where I am," Evan said quietly, his photographer's hands gripping his wine glass. "Oh, come on, sweetheart. You're always saying how you don't enjoy these corporate events. The other table looks much more relaxed." I gestured toward what everyone clearly understood was the kids' table, where spouses who didn't work at the company sat with the few children who'd been brought along. My mother, Susan, seated across the room, caught my eye and nodded approvingly. She'd always said Evan lacked ambition, and tonight she was seeing exactly what I meant. Dan slid into the chair beside me as Evan reluctantly gathered his things. "Thanks for making room," Dan murmured, his knee brushing against mine under the tablecloth. "I've been looking forward to sitting next to you all evening." "The pleasure is all mine," I replied, feeling a thrill of excitement as his hand briefly touched my thigh. The evening progressed beautifully. Dan and I discussed upcoming projects, and I could feel my colleagues recognizing the special relationship we shared. When the company president stood to make his toast, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, at the center of attention, next to the man who truly understood my worth. "To another successful year at Morrison Associates," Mr. Morrison began, raising his glass, "and to the partnerships that make our success possible." I raised my glass, basking in what felt like a personal tribute to my achievements. Dan's fingers intertwined with mine under the table, and I was certain this was the beginning of something extraordinary. That's when Evan stood up. The entire room turned to look at him as he calmly pulled out his phone and took a photograph of our table's seating arrangement. Then he turned the camera toward me, capturing my shocked expression as I realized what he was doing. "What are you—" I started to say, but he was already walking toward the exit, his phone still recording my stunned face. The room erupted in whispers. I felt my cheeks burning as dozens of eyes turned toward me, then toward Dan, then back to me. My perfect evening was crumbling, and I couldn't understand why Evan was being so dramatic. "He's just upset about the seating," I said quickly to the table, trying to salvage the situation. You know how sensitive photographers can be about their image. But even as I spoke, I could see the knowing looks being exchanged around the room. My 7-year-old daughter, Ella, sitting at the other table, looked confused and scared. Evan's sister, Naomi, shot me a look of pure disgust before getting up to comfort Ella. Dan squeezed my hand. "Don't worry about it. He'll cool off." I nodded, but something cold had settled in my stomach. Evan had never done anything like this before. He was supposed to be the quiet, compliant husband who supported my ambitions without question. As the evening wound down, I kept checking my phone for messages from Evan. Nothing. When I finally got home at midnight, I expected to find him waiting up for me, ready to apologize for his embarrassing behavior. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Staying at Naomi's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow." I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. If Evan wanted to throw a tantrum over one little seating arrangement, that was his problem. I had bigger things to worry about, like the promotion Dan had been hinting at all evening. I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache and the uncomfortable realization that Evan still wasn't home. After 3 cups of coffee and 2 aspirin, I decided to drive over to his sister's house and sort this mess out before it got any more ridiculous. Naomi answered the door with Ella in her arms, and the coldness in her eyes was unmistakable. "Where's Evan?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "We need to get home and get Ella ready for school." "Daddy's taking me to school today," Ella piped up. "He said you had to work early." "Actually, we need to talk," Naomi said, setting Ella down. "Evan's already left for some appointments, but he wanted me to give you this." She handed me a manila envelope with my name written in Evan's careful handwriting. Inside was a single key, not to our apartment, and a brief note. "Your belongings are packed and inventoried. Retrieve through attorney only. Do not contact me directly." "What is this supposed to mean?" I demanded, waving the note. "What attorney? What belongings?" Naomi's expression didn't soften. "It means he's done, Myra. And frankly, after what I witnessed last night, I don't blame him. You don't understand the pressures I'm under at work. Sometimes you have to make strategic decisions." "Strategic decisions?" Naomi's voice rose. "You humiliated your husband in front of dozens of people so you could sit next to your boyfriend. Don't try to dress it up as business strategy." The word boyfriend hit me like a slap. Dan is not my boyfriend. He's a colleague, and an important one. If Evan can't handle me networking with successful people, that's his insecurity, not my fault. "Right," Naomi said sarcastically. "Just like it was his insecurity when you started working late every night. Just like it was his insecurity when you stopped wearing your wedding ring to office events. Just like it was his insecurity when you started getting mysterious text messages at all hours." I felt my face flushing. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know my brother, and I know when he's been pushed too far. He spent 3 hours last night going through old photos and documents. Whatever he found, it was enough to make him change the locks on your apartment this morning." My stomach dropped. "He can't do that. It's my home too." "Actually, he can. The lease is in his name only, remember? You insisted on that for tax reasons when you got your first promotion." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd wanted the apartment lease in Evan's name to avoid complications with my rapidly increasing income, never thinking it could be used against me. I drove straight home, hoping Naomi was exaggerating. But when I tried my key in the front door, it didn't work. A new deadbolt had been installed, and there was a notice taped to the door. "Property secured pending legal proceedings. Contact Brennan and Associates for access to personal items." I called the number immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Brennan and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking." "This is Myra Kestrel. I understand my husband contacted you about some kind of legal matter, but there's been a misunderstanding." "Mrs. Kestrel, I have instructions not to discuss details over the phone. Can you come in this afternoon at 2 o'clock? I need to get into my apartment, my clothes, my work files. Your personal belongings have been carefully inventoried and photographed. They'll be available for pickup once certain legal matters are resolved. I can schedule you for 2 o'clock today, or we can arrange a later appointment. I agreed to the 2 o'clock meeting, then sat in my car outside my own home, feeling completely lost. This was insane. We'd had arguments before, but Evan had never been vindictive. He was the quiet, supportive type who avoided conflict at all costs. My phone buzzed with a text from Dan. "Hope everything's okay after last night. Coffee later." At least someone understood what I was going through. I texted back, "Definitely. Usual place at 11. The coffee shop where Dan and I met had become our regular spot over the past few months. It was discreet, halfway between our office and the restaurant district, where we often worked late on projects. Dan was already waiting when I arrived, looking concerned and handsome in his expensive suit. "You look stressed," he said, standing to kiss my cheek. The gesture felt natural, comforting. "Evan's having some kind of breakdown. He changed the locks on our apartment and hired a lawyer, over a seating arrangement at dinner." Dan frowned. "That seems extreme. Are you sure there isn't something else going on?" "Like what? I've been nothing but supportive of his photography business, even when it means irregular income. I've never complained about carrying most of our financial burden. Maybe he's feeling threatened by your success. Some men can't handle it when their wives outgrow them professionally." I nodded, grateful that Dan understood. "Exactly. I've worked so hard to get where I am, and instead of being proud of me, he's trying to sabotage it." Dan reached across the table and took my hand. "Don't let him drag you down. You're destined for bigger things, Myra. The promotion we discussed is still very much on the table." The promotion. In all the drama with Evan, I'd almost forgotten about the senior marketing coordinator position Dan had been advocating for on my behalf. It would mean a 40% salary increase and my own office. "When do you think we'll hear something official?" I asked. "Soon, very soon. Especially after last night. You handled yourself beautifully. Very professional, very focused on what matters." His thumb traced circles on my palm, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. Dan saw my potential in ways Evan never had. He appreciated my ambition, my drive, my willingness to do whatever it took to succeed. "I should probably get to the office," I said reluctantly. "I have the Morrison presentation at 3. "Actually, about that, I moved your presentation to Thursday. Something came up with the Henderson account that needs your attention first." I felt a moment of confusion. The Morrison presentation had been scheduled for weeks, and I'd been preparing for it extensively. But Dan was head of procurement. He understood the company's priorities better than I did. "Of course, whatever you think is best." He smiled and squeezed my hand. "That's what I love about working with you, Myra. You're so adaptable, so willing to prioritize what really matters." As I walked back to my car, I felt more confident than I had all morning. Evan could throw his tantrum and hire all the lawyers he wanted. I had Dan's support, a promotion on the horizon, and a career that was finally taking off. If my husband couldn't handle being married to a successful woman, that was his loss. But as I drove toward the office, I couldn't shake the image of Evan's face when he stood up at dinner. There had been something different in his expression. Not just hurt or anger, but a kind of cold determination I'd never seen before. Monday morning brought an unexpected email that made my blood run cold. "Please report to HR at 9:00 a.m. regarding a personnel matter. Bring your badge and any company devices." I stared at the message from Patricia Chen, our head of human resources, trying to make sense of it. Personnel matter? I was one of the company's rising stars. My performance reviews had been stellar, especially since Dan had started mentoring me. I arrived at HR 5 minutes early, dressed in my most professional outfit. Patricia was waiting, with a thick folder and a serious expression that immediately put me on edge. "Myra, thank you for coming in. Please have a seat." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "We've received a complaint regarding potential policy violations, and I need to ask you some questions." "Policy violations? I don't understand. What kind of complaint?" Patricia opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. The complaint alleges inappropriate workplace relationships and potential conflicts of interest. I need to review some records with you. She slid the first document across the desk. It was a printout of badge access logs, with my name highlighted in yellow. The dates and times showed me entering and leaving the building, but what caught my attention were the patterns. Dozens of entries showing me staying late, often until 9 or 10 p.m. These logs show you've been working significant overtime hours. Can you tell me about the nature of these late evening projects? I've been working on several high-priority initiatives. Dan Luring in procurement has been helping coordinate some of the vendor relationships for my campaigns. I see, Patricia made a note. And Mr. Luring has been present during these late evening work sessions? Sometimes, yes. He's been very supportive of my professional development. Patricia pulled out another document, visitor access logs. According to these records, Mr. Luring has accessed your floor after normal business hours 89 times in the past 5 months. That seems like an unusual amount of after-hours collaboration. My mouth went dry. 89 times? I hadn't realized it was that many, but when Patricia laid it out like that, it did seem excessive. We work on complex projects that require significant coordination, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sure you do. Patricia's tone was neutral, but I could sense skepticism. Now, I need to ask about some expense reports. The next document she showed me was a detailed breakdown of my corporate credit card usage. Restaurant charges, mostly at upscale places in the financial district. The amounts weren't huge, usually $80 to $120 per charge, but there were dozens of them. Company policy requires detailed documentation for all business meals, including attendees and business purpose. Many of these charges lack proper documentation. I can provide that information. Most of these were working dinners with Dan and various vendors. That's interesting, because according to our records, no vendor meetings were scheduled for these dates and times. And I have Venmo records showing you splitting many of these charges with Mr. Luring personally. She showed me printouts of Venmo transactions between Dan and me. Seeing them laid out like this, they looked damning. Project dinner, my half. Business meal split, thanks for covering drinks. These were legitimate business expenses, I insisted. Sometimes we had to handle vendor relationships informally, outside of normal procurement channels. Patricia made another note. I see. And can you explain these LinkedIn messages? My heart stopped. She was holding printouts of private LinkedIn conversations between Dan and me. Messages that had seemed flirtatious and exciting when we sent them now looked completely inappropriate in black and white. Looking forward to our next collaboration. You know how to make these projects rewarding. Dan, I appreciate all the opportunities you've provided. I'm always willing to go the extra mile for advancement. Me, I think we work very well together. Your flexibility has been noted by the right people. Dan, I believe in trading favors for advancement opportunities. It's how business really works. Me, that last message which I'd sent 3 weeks ago looked absolutely horrible in this context. I remembered typing it after a particularly intense evening meeting with Dan, feeling clever and sophisticated. Now it read like evidence of quid pro quo. These messages suggest a relationship that goes beyond normal professional collaboration, Patricia said. Combined with the access logs, expense irregularities, and your rapid promotion timeline, we have concerns about potential ethics violations. This is all being taken out of context, I said desperately. Dan has been a mentor to me. Yes, we've developed a good working relationship, but everything has been professional. Patricia closed the folder. I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please surrender your badge and any company devices. You'll be contacted within 48 hours about next steps. Administrative leave? This is ridiculous. I'm one of your best performers. My numbers speak for themselves. Your performance has indeed been notable. especially the timing of your 3 promotions in 18 months. That's actually part of what we need to investigate. I felt the room spinning. Who made this complaint? This is obviously someone trying to sabotage my career out of jealousy. The complaint was submitted anonymously through our ethics hotline, but it included detailed documentation that we're required to investigate thoroughly. As I handed over my badge and company phone, my mind raced. Who could have put this together? The access logs, the expense reports, the LinkedIn messages. Someone had done serious detective work to compile this evidence. Then it hit me. Evan, my photographer husband, who specialized in digital forensics as a hobby, who had access to our shared accounts and credit card statements, who had been strangely quiet and methodical since Saturday night. This investigation is based on stolen personal information, I said. My estranged husband is trying to destroy my career out of spite. Patricia's expression didn't change. The source of the complaint doesn't affect the validity of the evidence. These are all company records that we're required to review when potential violations are reported. I was escorted out of the building by security, past colleagues who watched with curiosity and whispered among themselves. The walk through the lobby felt endless, and I could feel dozens of eyes tracking my exit. In the parking garage, I sat in my car and tried to process what had just happened. My career was in ruins. The promotion Dan had promised was obviously off the table. And somehow, my quiet, unassuming husband had orchestrated this entire disaster. I called Dan immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried his office line, but his assistant said he was unavailable and couldn't say when he'd be free. For the first time since Saturday night, I felt truly afraid. Evan wasn't just throwing a tantrum about the dinner seating. He was systematically destroying my life, and he was doing it with the methodical precision of someone who had been planning this for a long time. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Heard you're home early today. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, realizing I couldn't even explain what was happening. How do you tell your mother that your marriage is over, your career is in ruins, and it's all because you moved your husband to the kids' table at a company dinner? By Tuesday afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. At first, I thought it might be Dan finally returning my calls, or maybe HR with an update on their investigation. Instead, I found my social media feeds exploding with activity. It started with a vague Instagram story from Jessica Martinez, one of the dinner attendees. Funny how some people forget who stood by them when they needed support. Actions speak louder than words. Within an hour, 3 other colleagues had posted similar cryptic messages. Then came the direct messages from friends asking what was going on. Saw Jessica's post, everything okay? What happened at the company dinner? People are talking, call me. I was staying at my mother's house, having nowhere else to go since Evan had locked me out of our apartment. Susan was making her famous chicken soup, convinced that this was all a misunderstanding that would blow over once everyone came to their senses. "Social media drama is so juvenile," she said, stirring the pot aggressively. "These people have nothing better to do than gossip about successful women." But the gossip was escalating quickly. By evening, someone had posted a photo from the dinner. Not just any photo, but the exact moment when Evan stood up and took his picture of our seating arrangement. In the image, I could be seen looking shocked and embarrassed, while Dan appeared to be leaning away from me, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The caption read, "When you realize your husband just documented you moving him to the kids' table so your work friend could sit closer. Company dinner, *shark awkward." The post had been shared 47 times in 3 hours, and the comments were brutal. "Wait, she actually moved her own husband away from her, at a work event. That's so disrespectful, poor guy. I would have walked out too." There's definitely more to this story. I called Jessica immediately. "Why are you posting about my personal life online?" "I didn't post anything about your personal life, Myra. I made a general comment about loyalty. If people are connecting it to Saturday night, maybe that says something about Saturday night. You know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to damage my reputation because you're jealous of my success. Jessica laughed. Actually laughed. Your success? Myra, you've been placed on administrative leave. The whole office knows about the HR investigation. Whatever success you think you had, it's over. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, realizing that the HR investigation wasn't as confidential as Patricia had implied. If Jessica knew about it, everyone knew about it. I tried calling Dan again, but his phone was still going straight to voicemail. His assistant had started telling callers that he was out of the office indefinitely. Something was very wrong. Wednesday brought worse news. I woke up to find that someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, had created a detailed timeline of Saturday night's events and posted it on Facebook. The post included the seating chart photo, screenshots of my LinkedIn profile, showing my rapid promotions, and a carefully worded narrative that made me look like a manipulative climber who had humiliated her supportive husband. Myra Kestrel moved her husband Evan to the kids' table at Morrison Associates company dinner, so procurement head Daniel Luring could sit beside her. When Evan quietly stood and photographed the seating arrangement before leaving, Myra appeared shocked that her actions had consequences. Evan is a professional wedding photographer who specializes in digital forensics. Draw your own conclusions about what he might have discovered. The post had been shared over 200 times and had attracted dozens of comments from people I barely knew. Worse, several Morrison & Associates employees had liked and shared it, making it clear that my professional reputation was being destroyed along with my personal one. My mother was furious. "This is harassment. You should sue them for defamation." "It's not defamation if it's true," I said miserably. "Everything in that post actually happened." "So what if it happened? You were networking. You were building professional relationships. If Evan can't handle being married to an ambitious woman, that's his problem." But even Susan's unwavering support couldn't shield me from the growing realization that I had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The seating arrangement that had seemed like smart networking on Saturday night now looked like public humiliation of my husband. The professional relationship with Dan that had felt exciting and career-enhancing now appeared to be an obvious affair that everyone could see except me. Thursday morning brought the final blow. I was getting coffee at the Starbucks near my mother's house when I ran into Trish Luring, Dan's wife. I'd met her a few times at company events, and she'd always been polite but distant. "Myra," she said, her voice ice-cold, "I was hoping I'd run into you." "Trish, hi, how are you doing?" "How am I doing?" She stepped closer, and I could see the anger in her eyes. "I'm doing fantastic, actually. My husband came home Monday night and confessed to having an affair with you for the past 5 months. He's been terminated from Morrison & Associates for ethics violations. We're getting divorced, so I'm just peachy." My face went white. "Trish, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been screwing my husband while I was home with our 2 kids? That you convinced him to promote you 3 times in exchange for sexual favors? That you humiliated your own husband at a public dinner so you could sit next to mine?" Other customers were starting to stare, and I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "It wasn't like that. We developed feelings for each other, but it was never about the promotions." "Bullshit!" Trish's voice was loud enough that the entire coffee shop could hear. "I've seen the LinkedIn messages, Myra. Trading favors for advancement opportunities. Your own words." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of the message I'd sent to Dan. Seeing it on Trish's screen, in a public coffee shop, with strangers listening to our conversation, made me realize how devastating this evidence would be in any legal proceeding. "Dan told me everything," Trish continued. "Every late-night meeting, every expensive dinner, every time you 2 disappeared for hours during workdays. He kept receipts, Myra, literal receipts. And now my lawyer has copies of all of them. I tried to leave, but Trish followed me to the parking lot. You destroyed 2 marriages for a promotion you're never going to get. Was it worth it? As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, still standing in the parking lot, talking animatedly on her phone, probably calling her lawyer or her friends, or posting her own version of events on social media. When I got back to my mother's house, I found a certified letter waiting for me. Inside was a notice from Morrison Associates, Evan's attorney, informing me that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that I needed to appear for a deposition next Monday morning. The letter included a preliminary list of evidence that would be presented, photographs of the seating arrangement, records of my badge access and expense reports, screenshots of LinkedIn messages, witness statements from 8 dinner attendees, and a complete timeline of my affair with Dan. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note. Your belongings remain available for pickup. Please coordinate through this office. Do not contact Mr. Kestrel directly. I sat on my mother's couch, surrounded by legal documents and social media printouts, and finally understood the scope of what Evan had done. He hadn't just walked out of a dinner in anger. He had spent months, maybe longer, carefully documenting my affair, building an airtight case, and preparing for this moment. My quiet, unassuming husband had destroyed my career, my marriage, and my reputation with the methodical precision of a professional investigator. And the worst part was, he'd done it all using evidence I had created myself. Monday's deposition was held in a sterile conference room that smelled like industrial carpet and disappointment. Evan's attorney, Michael Brennan, was a sharp-dressed man in his 50s who had clearly done his homework. Across from him sat my hastily hired lawyer, Robert Kim, who had warned me that this case would be challenging given the evidence. Evan sat at the far end of the table, looking calm and professional in a way I'd never seen before. He had a leather portfolio in front of him and was taking notes on a legal pad. When I entered the room, he didn't look up. Mrs. Kestrel, Brennan began, thank you for coming. We're going to review the timeline of events that led to this divorce filing, and I want to be very clear that everything you say here is under oath. He opened a thick binder and pulled out the first exhibit, a blown-up photograph of the seating chart from Saturday night's dinner. In the image, I could be seen gesturing toward the kids' table, while Dan waited to take Evan's seat. Can you explain to me why you asked your husband to move to a different table so that Mr. Luring could sit beside you? I glanced at my attorney, who nodded for me to answer. It was a networking opportunity. Dan is head of procurement, and I thought it would be beneficial for my career to discuss upcoming projects with him. I see. And did you consider how this request might make your husband feel? I assumed he would understand that this was a business dinner and that my professional relationships were important. Brennan made a note. Your professional relationships. Let's talk about your relationship with Mr. Luring. He pulled out the next exhibit, a timeline showing my 3 promotions over the past 18 months, with Dan's signature on each approval form. You received 3 promotions in 18 months, each one personally approved by Mr. Luring. That's unusual, isn't it? I'm a hard worker. My performance justified those promotions. I'm sure you are. But according to your actual performance reviews, which we subpoenaed from Morrison Associates, your ratings were consistently average until you began working closely with Mr. Luring. He showed me copies of my performance evaluations. The numbers were damning. Mediocre scores across the board until suddenly, starting 6 months ago, my ratings jumped dramatically. Can you explain this sudden improvement in your performance metrics? I felt trapped. Dan helped me understand what the company was looking for. He mentored me. He mentored you, I see. And this mentoring took place during the 89 after-hours visits he made to your floor over the past 5 months. There it was again, that specific number that made everything look so calculated and deliberate. We worked on several complex projects that required extended collaboration. Brennan pulled out another exhibit, the expense report showing dozens of restaurant charges, all split between Dan and me via Venmo. These complex projects required 47 dinner meetings at upscale restaurants, averaging 2 hours each, with no other attendees and no documented business outcomes. My lawyer finally intervened. Objection. That question assumes facts not in evidence. I'll rephrase, Brennan said smoothly. Mrs. Kestrel, can you name one specific business outcome that resulted from these 47 dinner meetings? I couldn't. The truth was, Dan and I had spent those dinners talking about our feelings, our ambitions, our attraction to each other. Very little actual work had been discussed. The relationship building was important for long-term strategic planning, I said weakly. Relationship building, that's an interesting phrase. Brennan pulled out the LinkedIn message printouts. Is this what you meant by trading favors for advancement opportunities? Seeing that message again, read aloud in a legal proceeding, was mortifying. That was taken out of context. What context would make that message appropriate for professional communication? I had no answer. The message was indefensible, and we all knew it. The deposition continued for 3 hours, with Brennan methodically working through every piece of evidence. Badge access logs showing me staying late with Dan. Rideshare receipts showing us leaving together from the same pickup location. Hotel charges on Dan's corporate card during out-of-town business trips that I had also attended. By the time we broke for lunch, I felt completely defeated. My lawyer pulled me aside in the hallway. Myra, I have to be honest with you. This is one of the most thoroughly documented adultery cases I've ever seen. Your husband has evidence of everything. Dates, times, locations, financial records, digital communications. Even if we went to trial, we'd lose. So, what are you saying? I'm saying you need to consider accepting whatever settlement offer they make. Fighting this will only make it more expensive and more public. When we returned from lunch, Brennan laid out Evan's terms. Full custody of Ella, with supervised visitation for me. Division of assets heavily favoring Evan, since he could prove that my increased income was obtained through fraudulent means, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the case publicly. This is outrageous, I protested. I'm Ella's mother. I deserve equal custody. Mrs. Kestrel, Brennan said calmly, your husband has 8 witness statements from the company dinner describing your behavior as inappropriate, disrespectful, and prioritizing an affair over family. He has documentation showing that you conducted this affair during your daughter's infancy, missing school events, and family obligations for romantic dinners with Mr. Luring. The family court judge will see all of this evidence. He was right, and I knew it. The timeline of my affair coincided perfectly with some of Ella's most important moments. Her first school play, her 6th birthday party, her parent-teacher conferences. I had missed or been distracted during all of these events because I was focused on Dan. I need time to think about this, I said. You have until Friday, Brennan replied. After that, we file for an emergency custody hearing and make all of this evidence public record. As I left the building, I saw Evan waiting by his car in the parking garage. For a moment, I thought about approaching him, trying to explain or apologize. But when he looked at me, his expression was completely cold. Not angry, not hurt, just finished. He got in his car and drove away without saying a word, leaving me standing alone in the concrete garage, surrounded by the ruins of everything I thought I had built. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I sat in my mother's kitchen, staring at the settlement documents that would officially end my marriage and my access to my daughter. Susan was making pancakes, maintaining her stubborn belief that this was all just a temporary setback. You don't have to sign anything, she said for the 100th time. Fight for what's yours. With what evidence, Mum? With what credibility? I had an affair with my boss. got promoted because of it, and humiliated my husband in public, what judge is going to side with me? My phone rang. It was my lawyer. Myra, I have some additional bad news. Morrison Associates has decided to terminate both you and Mr. Luring for ethics violations. They're also reviewing all the vendor contracts he approved during your relationship, looking for potential fraud. The fraud investigation was the final nail in my professional coffin. Even if I could find another job, any background check would reveal that I'd been fired for sleeping with my boss and potentially manipulating procurement contracts. There's more, Robert continued. Mrs. Luring's attorney has indicated they may pursue a civil suit against you for alienation of affection, and the company is considering whether to press criminal charges related to the contract irregularities. I hung up the phone and stared at the settlement papers. Evan's terms were harsh, but they were also final. If I signed, this nightmare would be over. If I fought, it would drag on for months, becoming more expensive and more humiliating with each court appearance. At 2 p.m., I walked into Brennan's office and signed every document they put in front of me. Evan wasn't there. He was picking up Ella from school, beginning his new life as a single father. There's one more thing, Brennan said as I finished signing. Mr. Kestrel wanted me to give you this. He handed me a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a USB drive and a brief note. Everything I found, in case you want to understand how this happened. E. That evening, I plugged the USB drive into my mother's laptop and found folders full of evidence that Evan had compiled over months of investigation. Screenshots of every LinkedIn message between Dan and me. Copies of every expense report and badge access log. Photos of Dan and me entering and leaving restaurants together, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. But the most devastating folder was labeled Timeline. It was a day-by-day breakdown of my affair, cross-referenced with family events and Ella's milestones. Every time I had missed dinner to meet Dan, every school event I had skipped for a work meeting, every weekend I had claimed to be busy with projects while actually spending time with my lover. Evan had documented everything with the meticulous precision of a professional investigator. He had known about my affair for months, but instead of confronting me, he had quietly built an airtight case that would protect Ella and ensure that my betrayal had consequences. The final document on the drive was a letter addressed to me. Myra, I know you probably think I'm cruel for not giving you a chance to explain or apologize, but I need you to understand that this isn't about anger or revenge. This is about protecting our daughter from the chaos you created. You made your choices over many months. You chose Dan over our family 47 times. You chose your career advancement over your marriage vows 89 times. You chose public humiliation over basic respect for our relationship. I documented everything because I knew you would try to rewrite history, to make this about my insecurities or your ambitions, or anything other than what it really was, a systematic betrayal of everything we built together. Ella deserves stability and honesty. She deserves a parent who puts her first, who shows up for her events, who doesn't prioritize secret relationships over family obligations. I will make sure she has that. I hope someday you'll understand that the person who destroyed your life wasn't me. It was you, one selfish choice at a time. Evan. I closed the laptop and sat in my mother's darkened living room, finally understanding the full scope of what I had lost. It wasn't just a marriage or a job. It was my daughter's respect, my professional reputation, my entire future. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had posted the seating chart photo on Reddit, where it had gone viral with over 4,000 comments. The story had been picked up by several gossip blogs and was being shared across multiple social media platforms. Woman moves husband to kids' table for Coworker. Husband documents everything and destroys her life, read one headline. The comments were universally unsympathetic. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This is what happens when you think you're smarter than everyone else. Her husband is a legend, methodical, thorough, and completely justified. She traded her family for a promotion she'll never get. Hope it was worth it. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters and bloggers wanting interviews. I turned it off and unplugged the landline, but the damage was done. My humiliation was now permanently archived on the internet, searchable and shareable for anyone who wanted to see what happened when someone prioritized ambition over family. 3 weeks later, I received the final divorce decree in the mail. The judge had granted Evan primary custody of Ella, with my visitation limited to supervised visits twice a month. The settlement left me with minimal assets and a court-ordered requirement to pay child support despite my unemployment. But the worst part was the final paragraph of the judge's ruling, which quoted my own LinkedIn message back to me. The court finds that Mrs. Kestrel's own words, trading favors for advancement opportunities, demonstrate a pattern of prioritizing personal gain over family stability and ethical behavior. My own words, preserved forever in legal documents that would follow me for the rest of my life. I moved out of my mother's house and into a small studio apartment across town, far from the neighborhood where Ella went to school, and where I might run into former colleagues or friends. I took a part-time job at a call center, the only employer who would hire someone with my recent history. 6 months later, I saw Evan and Ella at a park near my apartment. They were flying a kite together, both of them laughing as it soared above the trees. Ella looked happy and healthy, and Evan looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. I watched them from my car, understanding finally that I had gotten exactly what I deserved. I had traded my family for a promotion I never received, destroyed my marriage for a man who had also lost everything, and sacrificed my daughter's respect for a few months of feeling important. The seating chart photo that started it all was still circulating online, a permanent reminder of the moment when my selfishness became public knowledge. In the image, I looked confident and entitled, completely unaware that my husband was about to document the beginning of my downfall. I had moved him to the kids' table, thinking I was so clever and strategic, but in the end, I was the one who ended up with nothing. No husband, no career, no respect, and no one to blame but myself. As I drove away from the park, I realized that Evan's revenge had been perfect, not because it was cruel, but because it was simply the truth. He had given me exactly what I had chosen, a life without the family I had taken for granted, documented with the same precision I had used to document my own betrayal.